She wasn't just my sister, she was the shadow who touched what was mine. He chose her body but feared my silence more. Betrayal broke the house we shared, yet it built the fire in me. Now the man who cheated with my own blood crawls back, begging for my touch. The chandelier lights glowed too warmly that night, as if the house itself wanted to convince me everything was safe. I remember the faint hum of music coming from the living room, my sister's laughter carrying over it like a blade, dressed in silk. I held a glass of water in my hand, but I hadn't taken a sip. My fingers trembled against the cool rim because even before I saw anything, I knew something had shifted. It was the kind of shift you can't name, but you can feel it in your bones. He was late. That alone should have told me more than it did. My husband never came home without texting me first, but that evening he strolled in as if nothing mattered, coat draped over his arm and eyes flicking past me too quickly, before landing on her. My sister was already sitting on the couch, her bare legs crossed, her smile blooming like she'd been waiting for him all along. I told myself it was innocent, that family could be close, that I had no reason to doubt. Yet, my stomach twisted with every second of silence that followed. "Long day?" I asked, forcing brightness into my voice. He nodded without meeting my eyes, loosening his tie. His shoulders seemed heavier, but his smile, when it finally appeared, was for her, not me. She tilted her head like a cat stretching into sunlight, answering the smile with one of her own. My glass of water nearly slipped from my hand. They thought I didn't notice the quick exchange, the way his voice softened when he asked how her day was, the way her laugh lingered longer than it needed to. Every word between them was dressed up as casual, but every tone felt scripted, rehearsed, too careful. I sat on the armchair across from them, pretending to scroll through my phone, while my chest tightened. I wanted to scream, but instead I bit my tongue until I tasted iron. Dinner was worse. He served her first. He poured her wine before mine, like his instincts had been rewritten overnight. She leaned too close when she passed him the salt, her hand brushing his. It was quick, fleeting, but I caught it. They caught me catching it too. For a heartbeat, silence froze the room. Then she smirked and took a sip of her wine as if nothing had happened. I tried to speak, to pull us back to normal. "Did you hear from the office?" I asked him. He cleared his throat and answered with words I barely processed. My eyes stayed on his hand, the one that had just touched hers, gripping his fork too tightly now. My sister cut into her food, calm and slow as though she was savouring both the meal and my unravelling. When dinner ended, I followed her into the kitchen. I wanted to hear her deny it, to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she placed her plate on the counter and leaned back with that same smile. "You should relax," she said softly. "He's tired. Don't make him choose where to put his piece." "Don't play with me," I whispered. My voice shook, but my eyes didn't leave hers. She laughed lightly, tilting her head as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Maybe you should take better care of him," she replied, her tone drenched in false sympathy. "Men wander when they're not fulfilled." Her words sliced through me, but I stood still. My nails dug into my palm until the pain steadied me. I wanted to slap her, to rip that smile off her face, but I swallowed the rage. If I exploded now, she would win. She thrived on cracks in my control. He walked in then, carrying the wine glasses. He paused when he saw us, and guilt flashed across his face before vanishing. He placed the glasses down, his voice too calm, too practiced. "Everything okay here?" I forced a smile. "Of course," I said, my throat tight. "Why wouldn't it be?" His eyes flickered between us, then landed on her again. She touched his arm lightly, whispering, "She worries too much." My world tilted. He didn't pull away. He let her hand rest there, and in that small, unforgivable moment I saw everything. Later, when the dishes were stacked and the house quieted, I sat alone in the bedroom. I replayed every detail, the glances, the touches, the smiles they thought were hidden. My tears came fast, but even faster came the resolve. I had been blind, but I wasn't broken. They mistook my silence for weakness, but silence can turn into the sharpest weapon. The door creaked open and he stepped inside. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the top. He looked at me with forced concern as if rehearsing his lines again. "You're quiet tonight," he said. I stared at him, my face still wet from crying. "Am I?" I asked, my tone flat. He shifted, uneasy, running a hand through his hair. His guilt was leaking through the cracks, and he knew I saw it. "Don't make something out of nothing," he muttered. His words tried to dismiss me, but his eyes betrayed him. I stood walking past him to the mirror. My reflection looked different, harder, sharper, as though the girl I had been hours ago had already died. "Nothing," I repeated, my voice steady now. "If it's nothing, then why does it feel like I've already lost everything?" He flinched at that, his shoulders tensing. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And in his silence, I found the proof I needed. That night, I lay in bed, beside him staring at the ceiling, every breath I took measured and cold. My sister's perfume still lingered in the air, clinging to him like a second skin. He turned away from me, but I didn't close my eyes. The night my world still belonged to me was the night I realized it never truly had. And as I listened to his shallow breathing, I promised myself one thing. They would regret underestimating me. Because betrayal may break the heart, but revenge teaches it how to beat again. And when the time came, he would kneel. Not before her, not before us, but before me. The morning light fell across the curtains like nothing had happened, but my body remembered every detail of the night before. My chest still ached from holding back tears, and my throat burned from words I hadn't said. I watched him tie his shoes at the edge of the bed, his back to me, moving with the calmness of a man who believed his lies were still intact. "Do you want coffee?" I asked quietly, my voice stripped of warmth. He glanced over his shoulder, forced a smile, and nodded, but in the space between us there was no softness left, only glass splinters, invisible yet sharp. I walked to the kitchen, the cool tile grounding me as I set the kettle to boil. My sister's perfume lingered in the air, faint but stubborn like a ghost that refused to leave. She was already there, leaning against the counter in one of my silk robes. My robe. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, we stood in silence, the hum of the kettle the only sound between us. "Good morning," she said with a smirk that stretched too wide. I didn't answer. I placed the cups on the counter and poured the water, my hands steady though my heart wasn't. She moved closer, watching me with the lazy confidence of someone who thought she had already won. "He likes his coffee darker than you make it," she whispered, her voice dipped in venom. My grip tightened around the spoon, but I didn't look at her. I stirred the cup slowly, refusing to give her the reaction she wanted. He walked in a moment later and I watched his gaze flick toward her first. Quick, almost hidden, but not quick enough. Her lips curved into a secret smile and his throat cleared as he reached for his mug. That glance, that one careless glance, it was enough to slice me open. I sat across from them at the table, every clink of his spoon against the cup echoing like a confession. He asked about her plans for the day, his tone softer than it had been with me in weeks. She tilted her head, pretending to think, her fingers brushing over the rim of her mug. My stomach twisted at how natural it looked, like they had rehearsed this dance before stepping onto my stage. "Are you coming to the gala tonight?" he asked her. His voice carried a hint of excitement he hadn't shown me in months. "Of course," she replied, her eyes flicking to me for just a heartbeat before returning to him. "Wouldn't miss it." The gala, my gala, the one I had spent weeks preparing, for the one where I was supposed to shine beside him. Now it sounded like a stage where I would be forced to watch them together, hidden behind layers of polite lies. I excused myself, pushing back my chair before the tears could spill. In the bathroom, I locked the door and pressed my palms against the sink. My reflection stared back at me, pale and raw. How long had this been happening? How many nights had I mistaken his distance for stress instead of betrayal? A knock sounded on the door. His voice followed. "You okay?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the door open and demand answers, but I swallowed it, forcing my voice to sound steady. Just give me a minute. When I stepped out, they were sitting closer than before. Too close. My sister leaned in, whispering something that made him laugh, a low, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard in months. I froze in the doorway, my chest tight, my throat closing. They didn't even notice me. That whisper was louder than a scream. It told me everything I needed to know. I spent the afternoon pretending to prepare for the gala, laying out my dress, fixing my hair, moving through the motions like a ghost. Every so often I caught them in the corner of my eye, sharing looks, sharing secrets. I forced myself to remain silent, not because I was weak, but because I knew silence was now my weapon. When the evening arrived, the house buzzed with the tension of 3 people wearing masks. I slipped into my dress, the fabric hugging my body, like armor. In the mirror, I saw a woman who was no longer blind. My sister emerged in a gown that glittered too brightly, her smile polished to perfection. He stood between us, adjusting his cufflinks, pretending balance when his eyes betrayed him. At the gala, the chandeliers blazed above us, and the air smelled of roses and wine. Everyone greeted us like nothing was broken. But I saw it. The way his gaze drifted across the room only to land on her, the way she leaned just close enough to make people wonder but not close enough to prove it. I held my smile like a weapon, every word I spoke dipped in honey, though inside I was boiling. He reached for her hand once, quickly, quietly, as though the crowd might not notice. But I noticed. My heart pounded in my chest, my fingers clenched around the stem of my glass until it almost cracked. Later, when the music softened and the crowd thinned, I caught them slipping onto the balcony. I followed silently, my heels clicking against the marble, my breath steady despite the storm inside me. I stopped in the shadows just before the doors. Her voice drifted out, low and teasing. She'll never see it coming. His laugh followed, soft and guilty. She already suspects. My nails dug into my palms, my ears rang. There it was, proof. Not a glance, not a whisper, words, clear and sharp, slicing through me. I stepped back before they could see me, my body trembling but my mind sharpening. This was no longer suspicion. This was betrayal, in its purest form. And betrayal once named could never be buried again. The night ended with them walking back inside, their masks back in place, their smiles practiced. I joined them at the table, my face calm, my voice even. But inside I was building something they couldn't see. Because every glance, every whisper, every lie, they had written my plan for me. And soon they would both learn that I wasn't the quiet fool they thought I was. The morning after the gala, the air in the house felt heavier, like walls closing in on me. I moved through the rooms quietly, listening to the echo of my own footsteps, wondering how long I could carry their secrets without breaking. My sister was already in the kitchen, humming a tune as she spread jam on toast. My jam, my kitchen, my life. She looked like she owned the space, and the way she smirked when she saw me told me she knew it too. "You disappeared early last night," she said, sliding the plate toward herself. "People noticed." I poured coffee into my cup, ignoring her. But her voice followed me like smoke. "You should be careful. In these circles, absence looks like weakness." My grip tightened on the cup. Weakness. She wanted me to feel small, invisible, irrelevant. I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze. Funny. I thought weakness was hiding behind stolen smiles. For a moment, her smirk faltered. Then she leaned back in her chair, laughing softly, like I was nothing more than a child pretending to be fierce. He walked in then, adjusting his watch, his tie already knotted. He kissed my cheek out of habit, his lips cool and quick. But when his eyes drifted toward her, I saw the spark he thought he was hiding. My stomach turned and my hands shook so hard I nearly spilled the coffee. The three of us sat together pretending to be a family, but every word was a performance, every glance a betrayal. She brushed crumbs from the corner of her mouth, her eyes flicking toward him with that same playful glint. And when he looked back, the world around me blurred. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just whispers. It was a stage, and I was being written out of the script. Later that day, we attended a charity luncheon. I had chosen my dress carefully, a shade of deep emerald that made people turn their heads when I walked into the room. I told myself if I looked unshakable, no one would see the cracks forming beneath my skin. My sister came too, of course, draped in ivory silk, the colour of innocence she didn't deserve. She walked half a step behind me, but her smile shone brighter, sharper, pulling people's eyes away from me and toward her. As we mingled, I caught fragments of whispers from the crowd, compliments about her beauty, her charm, her wit. No one mentioned that she was my guest, my sister standing in a spotlight she had stolen. I watched him from across the room, standing too close to her, his hand resting against her back as he guided her through the crowd. My throat burned, and every laugh they shared was a blade slicing deeper. During the luncheon, he rose to give a speech. He spoke about loyalty, about honor, about family values. The crowd applauded, hanging on his every word. But I saw the truth, the way his gaze flicked toward her mid-sentence, the way she tilted her head, smiling like the speech was hers. My chest tightened, and the applause around me sounded hollow. When he returned to our table, she leaned in, whispering something that made him chuckle. His hand brushed hers beneath the tablecloth. I froze. My fork clattered against the plate, the sound cutting through the laughter around us. Heads turned, but I forced a smile, pretending nothing was wrong. My sister, without missing a beat, leaned back and said loudly enough for others to hear, "She's always so sensitive." The words dripped with false sweetness, but the message was clear. She was painting me as fragile, unstable, unworthy. The people at the table nodded politely, their eyes flicking toward me with pity. My chest ached with rage. In one sentence, she had shifted the entire room against me. I excused myself, walking out to the hallway before the tears could fall. Out there, away from the crowd, I pressed my hands against the wall and tried to steady my breathing. My reflection in the gilded mirror looked like a stranger, eyes wild, face pale, lips trembling. I wanted to march back in and tear the mask from both of them. But I forced myself to stay quiet because I knew silence was no longer weakness. It was patience. When I returned, she was standing at the center of the room, telling a story to a group of guests. Her laughter rang out, polished and perfect. He stood beside her, nodding, smiling, as though she were the star and he the loyal supporter. And in that moment it struck me, she wasn't just stealing him, she was stealing me, my place, my voice, my life. I caught her eye across the room and she smiled, a slow, triumphant smile that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. And the worst part? The crowd applauded her story, their faces bright with admiration, as though she were the rightful one standing there. That night, back at the house, I confronted him. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Do you even see what she's doing?" I asked, my voice sharp. He sighed, loosening his tie, looking at me as if I were exhausting him. "She's your sister." "Stop imagining things imagining." My voice cracked. "She undermines me in front of everyone. She mocks me in my own house. And you stand there laughing with her like what?" He snapped, his patience finally cracking. His eyes were cold, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard. "Not everything is about you." The words hit harder than any slap. I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. My sister's door opened down the hall, and she appeared, leaning against the frame with a smirk. She had heard everything. "Don't fight," she said smoothly, her voice dripping with false concern. "It makes you look desperate." He looked at her, and for a split second, his face softened. Not for me. For her. That was the moment I knew the war had begun. She wasn't hiding anymore. She smiled while stealing what was mine, and he let her. I went to bed with my fists clenched and my heart shattered, but somewhere inside the wreckage something harder was forming. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was cornered, but they had no idea what a cornered woman could do. Because if she wanted my life so badly, I would let her take it, just long enough for me to build the fire that would burn them both. The night it finally broke open, the house was full of voices. Guests drifted in and out of the living room, glasses clinking, laughter rising against the chandeliers. I had planned the dinner weeks ago. Our friends, his colleagues, people who were supposed to see us as a couple untouched by cracks. I had polished the silverware myself, chosen the wine, made sure the flowers on hers. The table were perfect. I told myself that if I controlled every detail, maybe the chaos inside me would quiet. But the moment I saw her walk in, dressed in scarlet silk that clung like flame, I knew the night wasn't mine. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, her perfume smothering, her smile a blade hidden in lipstick. "You look lovely," she said, her eyes flicking toward him before sliding back to me. The pause in her voice told the truth her words didn't. He arrived from the hallway, his tie already loosened, his eyes bright in a way they hadn't been for me in months. When he saw her, his lips curved, his entire body shifting with a quiet energy that made me sick. The guests noticed too, though they masked it with polite laughter. They saw the spark in him, the glow in her, and the absence of both in me. We moved through dinner like actors on stage. I laughed at jokes I didn't hear, passed dishes I didn't taste, smiled until my cheeks ached. But my eyes never left them. Every touch of her hand against his arm, every stolen glance across the table, every whispered word I couldn't quite catch, it all chipped away at the shell I'd been clinging to. When dessert was served, the room shifted. She leaned in, her lips brushing his ear, her laughter ringing out louder than the music. He didn't pull back. He let her linger. And then, as though the universe wanted me to see it, she pressed her hand against his thigh under the table. Not in secret, not hidden, bold, certain. I froze. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate, silencing the table. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, but I couldn't move. I stared at them, at her smug smile, at his guilty, fleeting glance. And in that moment, the world I had built shattered. "Are you all right?" one of the guests asked gently, breaking the silence. I forced a smile, the kind that trembles at the edges, and nodded, but my voice betrayed me. "I'm fine," I whispered, though nothing about me was fine. The room filled with noise again, but it was distant, muffled, like I was underwater. I stood, muttering something about needing air, and walked quickly down the hall. My chest felt tight, my throat raw, my eyes burning. I pushed into the bathroom and locked the door, pressing my back against it as tears finally spilled. I had seen enough whispers and stolen glances to suspect, but this was proof no one could deny. I slid down to the floor, my hands covering my face. The sound of the party carried, faintly through the walls. Music, laughter, her voice rising above it all. My stomach twisted until I thought I might be sick. For months I had convinced myself it was in my head, that I was being paranoid, dramatic. But there at my own table, in front of everyone, they had stripped away the mask. A knock rattled the door. His voice followed, low and careful. "Open up." Please, I didn't move. I didn't want to see his face, not while her perfume still clung to him. He knocked again, harder this Time. Don't make a scene. The words made me laugh, a bitter, broken sound. I opened the door and stepped back, my eyes blazing with tears. He looked at me, jaw tight, guilt flickering across his features. You're imagining things, he said quickly, too quickly. Don't let them see you like this. Imagining? My voice cracked. I saw it. Everyone saw it. She touched you. You let her. His face hardened. He reached for my arm, but I pulled back. Keep your voice down, he hissed. Why? I demanded, my chest heaving. Because the truth might ruin your perfect image? Because they'll know you're not just a liar. You're a coward. For a moment, his mask slipped. Anger flashed in his eyes, sharp and ugly. She makes me feel alive, he said under his breath, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. The words cut deeper than any scream. I staggered back, my hand against the wall to steady myself. He looked away immediately, realizing what he'd admitted, but it was too late. The blade had already gone in. From the end of the hall she appeared, leaning casually against the doorframe as though she had been waiting. Her smile was small, triumphant, cruel. Everything all right? She asked sweetly, her eyes locked on mine. I wanted to tear her apart. I wanted to scream until the walls shook, but instead I straightened, wiping the tears from my face with the back of my hand. I stepped closer to him, close enough for her to see the fire in my eyes. No, I said clearly, my voice steady now. Nothing is all right. The words hung in the air, thick and sharp, his shoulders tensed, her smile widened, and for the first time I felt something inside me shift. Not just pain, but resolve. When I walked back into the dining room, the chatter fell into a hush. They could all see it now. They didn't need me to explain. My sister had smiled while stealing what was mine, and tonight he had confirmed it with his silence. The room might have pitied me, whispered about me, written me off as broken. But none of them knew what I knew. A shattered woman is not a weak one. She is a woman who has nothing left to lose, and nothing is more dangerous than that. The house felt emptier after that night, as if the walls themselves had taken a step back to watch me burn. I moved through it like someone walking through a museum after the priceless piece has been vandalized, each room full of familiar things that suddenly felt foreign. I made tea with hands that trembled, trying to anchor myself to ordinary motions, spooning sugar, watching steam rise. But ordinary was gone. Grief sat heavy in my chest, sharp and slow, and beneath it grew something hotter, a current that hummed with purpose. I kept replaying his words. She makes me feel alive, and the image of her hand on his thigh at the table. I tried to tell myself that anger would fade, that time would dull the sting, but the memory refused to soften. Instead, it hardened into a precise shape. I realized I didn't want revenge, for the spectacle. I wanted a reckoning so clean that none of them could pretend ignorance afterwards. I wanted everyone who had watched and laughed and averted their eyes to understand what they had cheered for. I began small. I emptied drawers, rifled through his jacket pockets, not out of frantic spying, but because I needed facts, dates, messages, proof. There was a childish part of me that hoped I'd find nothing and that the pain would evaporate. Instead, I found receipts, little slips with her name on them, notes in his phone that called her by a pet name I'd never heard. Each paper, each screen lighted up a truth I already knew, but seeing it spelled out made it real in a way that the ache never had. When he came home that afternoon, he found me at the dining table with a pile of small evidence spread like playing cards. He stopped in the doorway, his face folding into a practiced concern. You shouldn't be going through my things, he said, more tired than angry, like I was simply being difficult. I'm looking, I said, my voice flat. I'm not imagining anymore. He moved closer as if to take the papers from me, and I drew them back like a mother protecting something tender. He leaned against the counter, watching me with tired eyes. This won't get us anywhere, Please stop for once. Stop asking me to stop, I replied. You asked me to trust you. Where's my trust now? My words were quieter than I felt, but each syllable carried a weight he could not ignore. Hubby and my sister played their roles well, he with his sighs, she with her artful opacity. She called that evening supposedly to check on me. Her voice over the phone was honeyed, concerned. I'm so sorry, love. You should take some time alone. Call me if you need anything. I listened to her and felt nothing but contempt. Her sympathy had an edge. It always had. I ended the call with a calmness that surprised me. That night, I wrote down everything. Every moment from the past months that now felt rhythms. The way he took the long route to the car on Tuesdays. The way she always called him at odd hours and hung up quickly. I learned where they hid conversations, glances across crowded rooms, messages that vanished from the screen when I entered the room. I kept a small notebook in my handbag and scribbled times and phrases, turning my pain into data. I found myself returning to the garden at night. There, under the orange glow of the street lamp, I let my anger speak aloud. You took what was mine, I told the black sky. You made a joke of my life. The words landed like stones. The garden, with its trimmed hedges and brittle roses, felt like an ally. It didn't judge. It merely held the sound of me making vows. I also began to consider leverage. Revenge isn't just spectacle, it's authority. To force him to kneel before me, I needed leverage that mattered to him, something he could not explain away at a charity luncheon or among colleagues. Money, reputation, secrets, any of these could be the tinder. I thought of the men at his office who still believed in his image, of the friends who would gossip, and of the social causes that kept us both tethered to a public face. If I could break that face quietly and cleanly, he would have nothing left to hide behind. One grey afternoon, I went through his online accounts while he was out. I'm not proud of the theft. I call it necessity. Passwords saved in browsers, a cloud of documents with names I didn't recognize, contracts, drafts, a folder marked with a project name I'd only heard him mention in passing. In it, I found an email thread with an address that wasn't his usual professional contact, one that hinted at risky investments and a rumor of impropriety. Nothing explicit, but enough to be dangerous if framed correctly. Dangerous, yes, but dangerous on paper is different from dangerous in voice. I needed corroboration. I started to reach out, delicately, to a contact from the gala who had once mentioned an interest in charity mismanagement. I phrased my emails like a curious insider, not an enraged wife. I asked casual questions, watched for replies, and kept my tone calm and unreadable. In that small network of acquaintances and mild obsessions, I began to plant questions that would make someone else dig. Meanwhile, anger softened into focus. I stopped loading my speech with venom and began shaping sentences like a lawyer. I practiced what I would say if confronted, what I would reveal, and what I would keep. I rehearsed to myself the moment when I would not only catch them, but reveal them in such a way that there was no room left for friendly dismissal. The thought of the apology he would offer, hollow, embarrassed, begging, made my resolve stiffer. I wanted him to feel the exact sort of exposure he had given me. There were nights when loneliness crept in, sharper for how carefully I'd masked it. I missed simple warmth, the easy laugh we used to share, the way he would read to me late at night, the comfort of being seen. But I could see now that what I had missed was an illusion. Convenience and habit mistaken for devotion. Recognizing the lie left me angry, yes, but also ready. Pain had refined my aim. One morning, as rain pricked the windows, I received an anonymous message through a forum I had never used. It was short. I have documents. Meet me beneath it a time and a neutral location. The old bookstore off Market Street. I felt a jolt of cold fear and a fierce thrill. This could be a setup. Dangerous and cruel. Or it could be the opening I needed. I sat with the message for a long time, turning possibilities over in my head like cards. If it was a trap, walking into it without preparation would be foolish. If it was real, hesitating could mean losing proof. I thought of my notebook, of the receipts, of the folder with questionable investments. I thought of his face at the dining table, of her triumphant smile. The decision tightened around me like a fist. Finally, I folded the phone and slid it into my pocket. I brushed my hair back, smoothed my dress, and picked up the small leather notebook that had become my ledger. I left the house with nothing but a handbag and the steady, purposeful beat of a woman who would not be dismantled by betrayal. The rain had lessened to a mist that painted the pavement with silver. As I stepped out, I told myself the truth. This was no longer about making him beg. It was no longer merely about punishment. It was about reclaiming the life they had stolen piece by piece with a precision that left no room for confusion. The bookstore waited like a throat to be cut or a mouth to speak. Either way, by the time I walked back through my front door, I intended to hold something they couldn't hide from. I walked toward the tram, my steps even. The ledger weighed reassuringly at my side. The plan was forming, and with it, the realization that once it began, there would be no turning back. The old bookstore smelled of dust and paper, the kind of place that kept secrets like loose change between pages. I arrived early, hands shoved into my coat pockets, the leather notebook heavy at my side. Rain had washed the city clean and left the sidewalks shining. The bell above the shop door gave a soft, apologetic chime when I stepped in. Shelves towered like silent witnesses. I told myself I would be careful. I told myself that patience had replaced panic. Both promises felt fragile as thin glass. A man waited at a corner table, his face half hidden beneath a cap. He looked older than his profile suggested, eyes bright and sharp against the dim light. He slid a small envelope across to me when I sat. His hands did not tremble. "You're Ms. Carter?" he asked, voice low, as if afraid people might overhear even names. I nodded. He didn't look surprised. He already knew who I was. He always would, I thought, when someone else decided my life was interesting. Inside the envelope were photocopies. Emails, transaction slips, screenshots of messages that had been deleted from his phone. One image stung more than the rest, a picture taken from a distance of him and my sister in a car. Close enough to be intimate, their faces turned toward each other like conspirators. Her hand rested on his knee, the proof felt obscene and necessary all at once. My throat closed, but the closure was steady now, not the raw sob that had come before. I folded the paper back into the envelope with controlled hands. "Who are you?" I asked. "Because names tether lies to reality," he shrugged. "Someone who notices when people steal other people's lives. I collect things. I sell them to the right people." He tapped the envelope. "There's more if you want it. Financials, small transfers that look innocent but mean things when connected." I swallowed. The man's offer smelled of danger. It also smelled like the only opening I'd been given. "How much?" I said. My voice was blunt. There was no room for theatrics. He named a number that would have been a small fortune in another life. I had savings tucked away, safe, steady money we had meant to spend on vacations and kitchens. I did not think of that now. I thought of the look on his face the night of the dinner, the way my sister's smile had bloomed like poison. I pressed my palm flat against the envelope and felt the weight of choice. "You can pay in parts," he offered, "or you can prove you're serious." There are people who trade information, for favors, for access, for discretion. His eyes studied me like an assessor appraising the value of an antique. "Tell me what you want to do with it." The question was a test. I told him I wanted truth that could not be shrugged off. I wanted evidence that would make his colleagues and friends see what I had seen. I wanted documents that would not vanish with a wave of charm. He nodded, and with that small motion, the plan began to take shape like a map forming under my fingers. Back at home, I spread the copies across the dining table. Each page was a new wound, but also a new tool. I read the messages again and again, not to hurt myself, but to learn the cadence of their lies. In the bank slips, small transfers lined up like breadcrumbs, cafes, a rental I didn't recognize, a boutique that sold perfume. The notes between them were coded with nicknames and private jokes that cut deeper because I understood how inside jokes create private worlds. I started to map their movements. Tuesdays, he took the long route through the park. Thursdays, there was a short transfer to a pay-as-you-go phone. She used a different email for event, RSVPS. Details that had seemed trivial suddenly mattered. I wrote each pattern in the notebook and circled them with a pen until the ink bled. Focus felt like armor. My first move had to be small and public, something to shift the tide without exposing myself too early. I crafted an email to a journalist I had met once at a fundraiser. Soft, curious, pointed. I didn't accuse. I suggested. "There's a pattern here," I wrote. "An odd trail that connects a few charity events and private donations. It's small, but it's consistent." I sent the message with the photocopies attached, but not all of them. Just enough to ignite curiosity. Then I waited, which had become easier than I expected. Waiting felt like sharpening a knife. When the journalist replied within a day, interest radiated from each line. He asked for more specifics and an anonymous tip. He wanted to know names, dates. I fed him details that would make someone look closer without revealing my role. I felt strange and empowered, like a quiet hand turning a key. The journalist promised discretion and asked to meet. I said yes and arranged the time. All the while I kept my face in public. The same woman who hosted book clubs and sent thank you notes. I painted my hair with the same practiced touch, put on my jewelry that had once been his idea, and smiled with the kind of hollow cheer that melts suspicion into sympathy. In private, I practiced my statements. "I noticed transactions in the charity accounts," I would say. "I'm worried about impropriety." I rehearsed calmness, the weapon of people who meant to be believed. At night, when the house quieted and my sister's laugh didn't follow me, I sat with an audio recorder and spoke into it the way I used to speak to a friend. Today, I sent an anonymous tip to a journalist. I told the tiny red light. I didn't sign my name. I didn't need to. Saying it aloud made it feel real. It also made me accountable. The recorder was a small thing, but later it would be useful. Memory can be slippery. Recordings are not. The plan required patience, but it also required a fissure, something to force them to show their true colours. I decided to plant one small public seed, a comment on social media that suggested impropriety in a neutral tone. "Interesting how quickly some charity funds move," I typed under. A post about one of his firm's donations. I used an anonymous handle I'd created days ago. It felt reckless and it felt right. Within hours, someone else picked up the thread. Whispers spread. People began to look. The smallest ripple had become a wave. When he confronted me that evening, his voice was low and more cautious than before. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" he asked. His eyes searched my face for fear or confusion. He found neither. "You're stirring things up?" He meant to. Warn me to stop. He believed I would. He didn't know that I had no intention of stopping until they understood the full measure of their crimes. "Someone tipped the journalist," I said, calm and steady. "Maybe it was you. Maybe it wasn't. But things are being looked at now." I let the words sit between us like a verdict. He went pale, fingers rubbing at the bridge of his nose. He opened his mouth to deny, then closed it. His silence was a second confession. That night, I lay awake listening to the house breathe. The plan had shifted from a private ledger into a public current. I had set a spark. I had started a fire that would not only warm me but would burn down the comfortable lies they'd been living in. The thought made my heart thrum. equal parts dread and fierce satisfaction. Tomorrow I would meet the journalist with photocopies and dates, with the quiet, precise narrative of facts I had assembled. I would be the anonymous voice that started the inquiry, the woman who would not scream but would show them every stitch in the seam. The next step would be messier, calls, whispers, maybe lawyers, but I was no longer afraid of mess. As dawn bled into the curtains, I folded the notebook closed and tucked the envelope into my coat. Outside, the street smelled of wet stone and beginnings. I walked to the window and watched my sister's car pull away, the silhouette small against the grey. The sight didn't make me break. It made me ready. They had stolen my life. Now I would take it back, one careful move at a time. The journalist's office smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the kind of place where gossip wore a coat of legitimacy. He met me at a small table by the window, hands folded, eyes sharp. He didn't ask for my name. I had been careful to remain anonymous in our messages. He tapped the stack of photocopies I'd placed between us and lifted one as if testing the weight of what I'd given him. "You left these in the Dropbox?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, practiced. I wanted someone outside our circle to look. He skimmed the pages, screenshots, bank transfers, a photo taken from a distance. His brow tightened the way it does when a story becomes real, not rumour. "This is enough," he murmured. "Combined with a source inside the firm, we can start a piece on possible charity misallocation. Not accusations, not yet. But we can make people look twice." He met my eyes then. "Do you understand the reach of this?" I did. I also understood restraint. "I do," I said. "I want them to look. I want the truth out where they can't ignore it." He slid the papers back toward me. "You're careful." "Quiet. That's useful. People listen when it's not hysteria." He smiled, the way professionals smile at a case well built. "I'll verify. I'll check transfer records, call contacts. You stay anonymous. Let me do the legwork." Leaving his office felt like closing the first chapter of a book you knew would not have a happy ending for someone. The journalist's promise hummed in my head as I walked the street, the city bright and unaware. I felt exposed, but also strangely cleansed. I had set a mechanism in motion. Now, I had to be patient. At home, they were ordinary, laughing softly in the kitchen, trading fragments of conversation I had heard before. The contrast between their ease and my tightened calm made something cold settle in my throat. I sat at the dining table with a cup of tea that went cold in my hand, watching him across the room. He joked about something small. She laughed, the sound light and dangerous. I felt the plan in my chest like a living thing, breathing. Days passed. The journalist called twice with questions. Dates, names, small confirmations. I fed him what I could without revealing myself. Each call was a needle threading a seam. I learned to speak in facts, specific times, amounts, places, and the journalist learned to do the rest. When the first online mention appeared, it was a whisper, an anonymous post on a watchdog forum about a pattern of unusual transfers connected to charity events. I clicked and read, heart hammering. It referenced locations I had circled in my notebook. Comments bloomed. Speculation, curiosity, thin outrage. It felt like the first tremor before an earthquake. That evening, my husband came home earlier than usual. He moved through the house with an edge I had seldom seen, feet quicker, posture sharp, eyes darting. He dropped his bag and returned to the living room where I pretended to read. His hands were not steady. He spoke to me then, not with anger, but with brittle control. "Did you hear anything at the office?" he asked. I kept my voice neutral. "Heard what?" He paused, jaw working. "Rumours. Nothing solid." He avoided my eyes. "We're being careful." "Are you?" I asked softly. "Because people are very good at noticing patterns." His face hardened. "I don't want trouble." Trouble. The word sounded small and childish, but it carried a weight. Trouble for him meant exposure. For me, it meant the truth. He left again that night, not to the office but to a meeting I didn't know about. When he returned, he closed the door behind him and sat in the dark, the house quieter than it had been in weeks. "You started something," he said finally, voice low. "I started a thread," I corrected. "Someone else is now pulling at it." He ran his hands over his face. "This is dangerous." "Everything about what you did was dangerous," I replied. "You chose to hide things. You chose to risk other people's trust." He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw actual fear. Not guilt masquerading as annoyance, real fear. "If this goes public, everything will fall apart," he whispered. He sounded small suddenly. "My career, our life." "Then you should have thought of that before you betrayed it," I said. The words felt colder than I expected. He flinched. The next morning the journalist called again. His voice was clipped, professional, excited in a careful way. "There's more to this than transfers," he said. "There are connections to a donor list and a contractor who's been paid in ways that don't add up. I'm writing a preliminary piece. I want to publish next week if I can confirm a few more things." My hands tightened around the phone. My pulse thrummed loud in my ears. "Be careful," I told him. "Make sure it's solid." He promised he would. Promise was his currency. Truth his product. I believed him enough to breathe. Word. Moved faster than I expected. An acquaintance messaged me, asking if I'd seen the chatter. Another friend, someone who'd once commented on my outfits, texted a vague worry about what people were saying. The gossip churned like a tide. My sister called, her voice bright but slightly clipped. "Have you heard? Nothing about us, right?" "Don't worry." Her question was a pretense. I heard the tremor beneath the sugar. I heard it like an undertow. I listened and learned. At the gala where we had once, felt like a united front. The air was different. Eyes lingered longer, questions nested in polite conversation. People watched him with new curiosity. He answered with a practiced ease that didn't reach his eyes. She stayed near him, smiling with the right amount of concern, measuring her face like a mask. They both played their parts, but I watched for fissures. A week later, the journalist published a narrow, cautious piece. It didn't name names. It did, however, detail anomalies in charity, accounting connected to events our circle attended. It quoted an anonymous tip. The article spread. It was careful, clinical, but the implication was clear. The ripple became a wave. That night, our house changed temperature. The phone rang with calls from colleagues, inquiries laced with thinly veiled accusations. Messages came in from people I barely knew, requests for clarification, offers to help, veiled threats about reputations. The world we had moved in had teeth now. It was hungry. He met me in the kitchen, eyes dark. "They're asking questions," he said. "I know," I replied. "You should talk to your partner." "Explain." He shook his head. "You don't understand how these things work. A rumor can ruin people." "A rumor?" My laugh was sharp. "A rumor? You call your affair and hidden transfers a rumor?" I felt something inside me move and harden. The journalist had given them a mirror, and now the mirror reflected what they had chosen to be. His desperation turned to accusation. "Are you behind this?" he demanded, reaching for the old line, the one that always aimed to shift blame back toward me. I met his stare without flinching. "Maybe someone cared enough to make it visible," I said. "Someone tired of lies." His face lost colour. He realised that whether I'd started it or not, the truth was no longer his to control. In the weeks that followed, the pressure mounted. Audits began, quiet phone calls with partners, lawyers issuing questions framed as concern. He tried to salvage things with charm and hurried meetings. She watched him with a new vigilance. In private, they argued, loud enough for me to hear thin edges through the walls. In those scraps of noise I heard panic, not passion. The moment I chose fire over forgiveness came quietly, almost like a decision made between breaths. I had not burned down their world in an afternoon. I had lit a slow fire, a careful burn, one that consumed the foundation instead of the surface. I had traded the collapse of an illusion for the excavation of truth. One night, after a call from the journalist with new confirmations, I placed the notebook on the table and opened it to the list I had kept, the dates, the transfers, the meetings. I read each line like a verdict. Then I took my phone and sent one message to a group chat of school parents, anonymously of course. It linked to the article and asked simply, "Have you ever noticed donations from X firm moving oddly after events?" It was small, social. It would look like concern from one of many. Within hours, the chat exploded. Parents discussed, shared the link, tagged colleagues. The rumour became a public conversation. A foundation contacted its board. An audit now had a chorus. The small social pebble had become a landslide. I watched as the house around me tightened. My sister's calls became fewer and sharper. He stopped coming home early. He slept on the couch for a night, then two. Their quiet was a thin line between them, fraying faster every day. I knew the road ahead would be messy. Lawsuits, denials, public apologies that say nothing. But I also knew I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. I had chosen fire over forgiveness, and the flames were spreading. When a knock came at the door that night, it was not the lawyer I expected. It was someone from his firm, a man with a polite face and a folder in hand. He asked to speak with him privately. I let them through. I watched them go into the study and close the door. I waited in the living room, palms flat against my knees, listening to muffled voices. A thin line of fear traced down my spine, but beneath it thrummed something fierce, the knowledge that I had done what I had set out to do. They would answer questions now. They would have to face what they had done, not in whispers, but in documentation, in audits, in the cold light of other people's scrutiny. When the study door opened, his face was unreadable. He walked past me without looking. My sister followed, avoiding my eyes as if she could make me invisible again. I sat back, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. The plan had moved from speculation to action. The next steps would be uglier, truer, and, I hoped, final. Outside, rain began again, a soft percussion that matched the steady beat of my resolve. The fire had been chosen. Now I would see how much it would burn. The storm didn't break with thunder. It broke in silence. She had been careful for weeks, slipping through rooms with a dancer's poise, her lies draped in silk and smiles. But even the clever forget the weight of their secrets. Even the cunning grow careless. That night, her carelessness gave me everything. It was late when I walked past the study. The door had been left slightly ajar, the glow of a lamp spilling across the hallway. I paused, listening. Her voice drifted out, low, urgent. She was on the phone. "Yes, he's panicking," she whispered. "No, he won't leave her yet. He's afraid it'll look like guilt." Pause. Then her laugh, sharp, triumphant. "Don't worry. She's already broken. I can handle her." The words struck like glass shattering in my chest. She wasn't just taking him. She was plotting, managing, speaking of me like a nuisance to be brushed aside. My hands clenched at my sides, nails cutting into skin. For a moment I thought I might collapse against the wall. Instead, I pushed the door open. Her head jerked up, eyes wide. The phone clattered to the desk, the line still buzzing faintly. For the first time in weeks, I saw it, the crack in her mask. "You," I said softly, stepping into the room. My voice was too calm, almost steady. "Handle me? Is that what you think?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She reached for the phone, fumbling to end the call, but it was too late. I had heard enough. I walked closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "Do you know what I've been doing while you've been smiling in my face?" my voice sharp and trembling with control. I've been writing. Recording, collecting, every lie, every transfer, every look. You thought no one noticed. She tried to laugh then, tried to pull the mask back over her face. You're imagining again, she said. You're paranoid. Everyone knows. Everyone knows, I cut her off, because I showed them. I leaned closer, my words a blade between us. Your secret isn't a secret anymore. It's in files, in emails, in whispers you can't control. And soon, everyone will see what I see, her face drained of colour. For the first time she didn't smirk, she didn't laugh, she didn't taunt. She sat frozen, staring at me as though she had finally realised the truth. I was no longer the sister she could play with like a doll. The silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. Then she broke, her voice cracking. He loves me, she whispered, desperate. He'll choose me. I shook my head slowly, a bitter smile pulling at my lips. He won't choose either of us. He's too busy choosing himself. Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no pity. Not anymore. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. You should practice your smile, I said, because when this collapses, and it will, you'll need it for the cameras. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, listening to the storm building inside the house. I heard them arguing in the hallway, their voices sharp and frantic. He begged her to keep quiet. She accused him of cowardice. They spoke my name like a curse, as though I had become the villain in their story. But I wasn't the villain. I was the mirror they couldn't look away from. The next day, the article grew teeth. The journalist published a follow-up, this time with specifics, dates, numbers, names of charities suddenly requesting audits. The city buzzed. Colleagues distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. Their empire, built on charm and silence, began to crumble. I watched it unfold with a steady heart. At a cafe, I overheard two women murmuring about them, their voices low with scandal. At the market, someone I barely knew gave me a pitying look, as though I were the collateral damage of someone else's mistakes. I let them believe it. The more broken I appeared, the less they suspected the truth, that I was the architect of their collapse. That evening, she tried to confront me again. She stormed into my room, eyes red, fists clenched. You think this will save you? She hissed. You think ruining him will make you whole again? I stood, meeting her rage with calm. This isn't about saving me. It's about showing the world who you really are. Her shoulders trembled. She wanted to strike me. I could see it in the way her hand twitched. But she didn't. She couldn't, because for the first time she was the one afraid of exposure. Leave before it's too late, I warned, because when the truth finishes unraveling, it won't be me the world despises. It will be you. She faltered, her breath catching. Then she fled, slamming the door behind her. I sat back on the bed, my pulse steady, my chest oddly light. The power had shifted. She could no longer smile while stealing what was mine. Her secret had collapsed, and it collapsed because I forced her to look me in the eye while it crumbled. And though the battle was far from over, I knew this. The war was no longer theirs to win. He came to me late at night, when the house had quieted and my sister's door was shut. His footsteps were heavy, dragging, the sound of a man whose world had started to collapse, beneath him. I sat in the living room, a single lamp casting pale light across the room. I didn't rise when he entered. I didn't ask what he wanted. I just watched him, waiting. He stopped in front of me, his tie loose, his shirt wrinkled. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from tears. I knew him too well for that, but from exhaustion, from fear. His voice cracked as he spoke, something I'd never heard before. Please. Talk to me. I leaned back in the chair, my arms folded. Now you want to talk? He flinched at the coldness in my tone. I know I've made mistakes. Mistakes? I cut him off, my voice sharp. A mistake is forgetting a birthday. A mistake is missing a dinner. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Again and again his jaw tightened. He sank onto the couch across from me, burying his face in his hands. For a moment the silence stretched so thin, I thought it might break. Then he lifted his head, his eyes shining with something close to desperation. I can't lose everything. Not like this. Help me, I stared at him, almost laughing. You want my help? After you tore me apart in front of the world? After you gave her everything I built with you? His breath shuddered out. She doesn't matter, he said quickly, too quickly. It was never about her. The words were hollow, brittle. I let them hang in the air before answering. She mattered enough for you to risk me. She mattered enough for you to risk your name. Don't insult me with lies. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped as though in prayer. His voice dropped to a whisper. I can't survive this without you. The begging should have softened me. Once it might have. But now all it did was confirm what I already knew. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he had been caught. You want me to protect you, I said slowly. To stand beside you while the world tears into your lies. To pretend that we're still whole. Yes, he admitted, his voice breaking. Please, just until this blows over. Please. For the first time I saw him clearly, not as the man I had loved, but as a coward clawing at the walls of his collapsing empire. And I realized how small he was. How pitiful. How unworthy of the power he had wielded over me for so long. I stood, the chair scraping softly against the floor. He looked up at me, eyes wide, desperate. Don't walk away, he begged. I stepped closer, so close he had to tilt his head back to meet my gaze. You had every chance, I said, my voice cold and steady. You chose her. You chose yourself. Now you can choose to face the truth alone. His face crumpled, and for a fleeting second I thought he might cry. Instead, he sank back into the couch, his body folding in on itself, the fight gone. You'll regret this, he whispered, but there was no power in it. I leaned down, close enough for him to feel the fire in my words. The only thing I regret, I said, is ever believing you deserved me. I turned and walked out, leaving him slumped in the pool of lamplight, a shadow of the man he had pretended to be. The next morning, whispers had grown into shouts. Headlines circled online, charity funds under scrutiny, audit requested by board members. His name wasn't printed yet, but it was there in every insinuation, every pointed phrase. Calls flooded the house. He locked himself in the study, shouting into the phone, his voice cracking under the weight of questions he couldn't answer. I passed by the door once, listening to him plead with someone on the other end. It's not true, he said, desperation spilling into his tone. They're exaggerating. Please give me time to fix this time. He thought time could erase what he had done. But truth doesn't dissolve with time. It sharpens. That evening he tried again. He cornered me in the hallway, his voice softer now, almost pleading. We can start over. We can rebuild. If you stand with me, they'll believe in us again. I studied him. The man who had once held my hand with promises of forever. All I saw now was fear dressed as love. They don't believe in you anymore, I said. And neither do I. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no words came. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. Later, I found my sister in the garden, pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. She was snapping at someone, her voice sharp, panicked. When she noticed me, she hung up quickly, her mask flickering. He's unraveling, she said, as if I were her confidant, as if we were allies again. I smiled at her, but there was no warmth in it. So are you. Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. We both knew the truth. The walls were closing in, and no amount of charm or lies would hold them up. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed his voice in my head, pleading, desperate, begging. Once those words might have bound me to him, but now they were nothing more than echoes, hollow and weak. His begging voice couldn't erase the truth. It couldn't erase what he had done. And soon the world would hear his desperation too. The house no longer felt like a home. It was a graveyard of lies, each room echoing with the ghosts of promises broken. Papers littered the study, his frantic notes and unanswered calls piling up like debris after a storm. My sister moved through the halls with tight lips and darting eyes, no longer bold, no longer smug. The empire they had built on, secrecy and betrayal, was crumbling, and I was no longer willing to live inside its ruins. That morning I packed a small suitcase, not everything, just enough. Clothes, documents, the leather notebook that had become my shield. I folded each item carefully, my hands steady, my mind clear. For months I had been caught between grief and fury, but now there was only resolve. This was not running away. It was walking out on a world that had already burned. He found me in the bedroom, the open, suitcase at my side. His face was pale, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked older than I remembered, worn down by nights without sleep, by headlines he couldn't control. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice breaking. "I'm leaving," I said simply. His chest rose sharply. "No, you can't. Not now. If you walk out, it'll look like you've abandoned me." I zipped the suitcase closed, the sound final. "I'm not abandoning you. You abandoned me a long time ago." He stepped closer, his hands trembling as if he might reach for me. "Please," he begged, his eyes shining with the same desperation that had filled his voice for days. "We can fix this." "I'll end it with her. I'll do whatever you want." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. The man who had once promised me the world stood in front of me, small and hollow, broken by the truth he could no longer bury. "You already did whatever you wanted," I said, "and this is the result." He sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. "They're tearing me apart out there," he whispered. "You should let them," I replied. "It's the only honest thing left." I carried the suitcase down the hall, my heels clicking against the wooden floor. My sister appeared at the end, her arms crossed, her face pale. "So you're just going to leave?" she asked, her voice sharp but brittle. "Yes," I said. "Enjoy the ruins." Her lips parted, but no words came. She leaned against the wall, suddenly smaller, suddenly lost. For the first time, she looked like what she was. A woman who had gambled everything and was now standing in the ashes. I walked past her without slowing. For months she had stolen my place, my voice, my life. Now I was giving them back to her, not as gifts, but as curses. Let her live with the wreckage she had helped build. The car was waiting outside, its engine humming softly. I placed the suitcase in the trunk and slid into the seat. As the driver pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time. The curtains fluttered in the windows, the walls looming like a monument to betrayal. But it no longer belonged to me. I had carried my grief inside it for too long. Now it could crumble without me. The city stretched ahead, alive with noise and light. For the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs without burning. I checked my phone. Messages stacked up, some from friends offering sympathy, others dripping with curiosity. I ignored them all. This wasn't about their pity. This was about me. Choice. I rented a small apartment across town, nothing grand, nothing polished. The walls were bare, the furniture simple. But when I set my suitcase on the floor and sat on the bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The silence wasn't heavy here, it wasn't sharp, it was mine. That evening I opened the notebook, running my fingers over the ink-stained pages. Every detail I had collected stared back at me, receipts, dates, whispers, proof of everything they had done. I thought of burning it, of erasing it from my life. But I didn't. The notebook wasn't just evidence, it was a record of my survival. a reminder of how far I had come. The next day, the scandal widened. Newspapers printed names now. His firm announced an internal review. The charities issued statements, their tone sharp with disappointment. Pictures of him and my sister began to circulate. Grainy, candid, undeniable. Their faces splashed across headlines with words like betrayal, fraud, and collapse. People whispered about me, of course. The wronged wife, the quiet victim. Let them. They could whisper whatever they wanted. I didn't need to correct them. I knew the truth. I had walked away before the ruins buried me. One afternoon, as I left the apartment, I found him waiting on the sidewalk. His suit was wrinkled, his tie gone, his face hollow. He looked like a man who had aged years in weeks. "Please," he said, stepping forward. "Come home." "There is no home," I said. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back, his eyes filled with panic. "They won't stop until I'm destroyed." "I need you. You're the only one who can stand beside me, who can silence them." I shook my head slowly. "You silenced me for too long. Now it's your turn to be silent." The words landed like stones. His shoulders sagged, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I walked past him, my head high, my steps steady. I didn't look back. That night, I stood at the window of my apartment, watching the city lights flicker. The ruins were behind me. The life I had thought I needed was gone. But in its place was something stronger: freedom. I had walked away, not in shame, not in defeat, but in power. And as I closed the curtains, I knew this. The ruins they built would remain, but I would never be buried in them again. The last papers hit the table with a finality I had wanted for months. Auditors had called. The firm had frozen accounts. His phone would no longer ring with invitations. It rang now with lawyers and angry partners. My inbox filled with messages, some kind, many prying, but I only opened the ones that mattered. Confirmations, dates, subpoenas. The world had shifted its center of gravity, and I felt it settle under my feet in a way that steadied me instead of breaking me. They tried everything. He tried charm, then anger, then pleading. She tried to smile and then to vanish. And when vanishing didn't work, she tried to barter with guilt. Neither worked. The cameras came, the questions came, the hard light that turned polished things ugly. The charity board released a statement, tight and formal. The firm announced an independent investigation. Colleagues called to distance themselves. Friends sent cautious texts. The social invitations stopped. The house was a scar on the map of our lives, and people no longer wanted to cross that street. I sat in the small office I had rented. A bright room on the third floor, a desk, a lamp, a plant that I was learning to keep alive. The apartment felt like a life I could arrange rather than inherit. I had started meeting with people who wanted the truth because they believed it, not because they wanted a headline. A lawyer recommended by the journalist met me with a quiet competence that felt like armor. He explained options: civil claims, restraining orders, calls to foundations. I listened. I chose carefully. The first public hearing was messy and precise. He sat across from me, pale and scrawny in a suit that looked too large on him. Now. The room smelled of paper and coffee and the kind of tension that comes when reputations are pried open. He tried to look composed. I scanned his face and saw panic in the small lines around his eyes. He looked small, not in stature but in consequence. A man who had traded dignity for temporary excitement. He had been used to power. Now it used him. My lawyer spoke for me in ways I had practiced in the mirror. Words measured, facts lined up like dominoes that would not fall the wrong way. I did not shout. I did not plead. I told the truth when asked, short and clean like a scalpel. The court listened. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I rose. Everything they loved was built on clever omissions, I said, my voice clear in the small room. I trusted what I shouldn't have, and I suffered for that trust. But I did not want revenge for spectacle. I wanted truth. I wanted other people to know they were not the only ones who could be surprised by kindness turned selfishness. The words landed, and the room inhaled. I stepped down and let the process do the rest. Outside the courthouse, cameras asked questions that had once sounded like weapons. I answered the ones I wanted to answer and walked away from the ones designed to drag me back into their drama. People sought a scene. I refused to act. The silence in my refusal felt like a new kind of power. They tried to rebuild in the rubble. He took meetings with partners, tried to salvage what he could, his explanations clumsy and thin. She moved towns for a while, her name whispered in the same breath as scandal. Invitations dwindled to zero. She sent me a message once, not begging exactly, just a short, sharp line. "You ruined us." I read it and folded the phone closed. Ruined, maybe. Or maybe I had returned reality to them. In the months that followed, pieces fell into place. The auditors published a report that named irregularities. The firm paid fines and a few people left in disgrace. The charities improved policies. He lost clients. She moved away, her social circle a memory. None of that healed everything, but it changed the story that had been told about us. I built a life like someone building a house after a fire. Slowly, brick by careful brick. I took a small job advising a non-profit on governance. Ironic, perhaps, but honest work. And I found that helping organizations protect themselves felt like reassembling the pieces of the world I wanted to live in. I met people who were direct and kind, strangers who became friends by degrees. I learned to sleep without waking to the panic of betrayal. I learned to love coffee I didn't pour for anyone else. There were nights when the old ache passed through me. The sudden hunger for what had been, the memory of easy mornings, the voice that had once been my favorite sound. Grief remained a roommate in my life for longer than I expected. But grief no longer dictated my days. It had been tempered into something I could carry without crumbling. Once he came to my apartment unannounced. I opened the door and saw him standing there, shoulders tight, eyes wet with a humility he had never displayed in public. "I made a mess," he said, voice small. "I thought I could fix it. Fix us." He waited for me to fold, to ask him to stay. Instead, I invited him to sit. I listened while he tried to explain. I listened while he offered apologies that had the shape of honesty at last. He asked for a chance to make amends. I told him, "Number," I said it gently, and with no theatrics. "You've asked me to forgive before," I told him. "You asked me to make things whole when you had already shattered them. Forgiveness that erases lesson is dangerous. I can forgive, perhaps someday, but I will not put myself back where I can be broken again." He nodded, and something like acceptance passed over his face, slow, pained, but real. He left with a quiet that felt like a submission to consequence. The last time I saw my sister in person, she stood at the edge of a park, face pale in the afternoon sun. I had not planned to talk to her, but the timing of life made fools of plans. She approached, her movements cautious. Her smile was smaller, less sure. She began with a question, an attempt at reconciliation, thin as tissue. I listened. She faltered. She asked for forgiveness in a way that begged me to forget. I looked at her, at the girl who had once been my confidant and then my enemy. The world we shared had shifted, and the choices she made had pushed us apart in ways that words alone could not rebuild. I thought of all the small cruelties, the public jabs, the private betrayals. I thought of what I had lost, and what I had gained. "I can't erase what happened," I said finally. "I can't pretend it was an accident." My voice held sadness, yes, but no hunger for revenge. She left with a slow, broken apology. She would rebuild somewhere else. Maybe she would learn. Maybe she wouldn't. That was not mine to fix. Months turned to a year, and the memory of the scandal softened at the edges in public, as the next bright thing usually does. But in private, the lessons kept me steady. I taught a boardroom how to audit gifts, led a workshop on prevention, spoke at a small conference about accountability. Each time I found an audience, I felt less like a victim and more like someone passing on the tools to avoid what I had endured. One evening, as winter thinned into spring, I stood on my small balcony with a cup of coffee and watched the sunrise push colour into the city. My life was quieter, yes, but it was honest. My power looked like freedom, the ability to choose who stood in my life, the courage to leave what harmed me, and the steadiness to build again. They had tried to burn me down. They had expected ash. Instead, I planted. When people asked how I had found the strength, I told the simple truth. I stopped measuring myself by what they stole and started counting what I could keep. The rest was work. The rest was patience. The rest was choosing myself every day. And in the end, when the cameras had left and the gossip cooled, I stood in the doorway of my small office and watched the city stretch out like a map of possibilities. I closed the door behind me, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I was finally the one deciding where to go next.